We're loading. We're live. Awesome. We got it to go through. Only 4 minutes late. That's not too delayed. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get going. Thank you, everybody, for joining us via Zoom. Thank you for joining us via Facebook Live. We're happy that you're here with us today. I am Caleb Gwerder I'm the state coordinator with the Young Farmers and Ranchers program of the Washington State Farm Bureau. And I am here with Andy Bob Cajun Junkin with Agriculture Strategies. He's the one that's developed the Coming Home to Farm online course available for members and farmers throughout our state for succession planning. And Andy, describe what you do real quick.
Basically, my deal is I get everybody from button heads and pulling the farm in different directions to being able to sit down and make decisions together, get everybody pulling in the same direction. My niche is I help stubborn farm families work better together. And generally I'm able to double farm profitability as a result of that.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining us this evening. I know this isn't going to be the only live event we'll be doing. We'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. But just a quick recap, the Coming Home to Farm online course, you can find more information about it on the Washington Farm Bureau page, website under Young Farmers and Ranchers, or you can find Andy Junkin's page, which is where the online course resides. And that's on Agriculture Strategies. Strategy.com.
Here's a Y there. We're good.
Yeah, it looks pretty good from here. But anyway, there's tons of seminars. It's about a 10-hour online course. This is available at an 80% discount for our members. We want to make sure that it's provided to you, easily accessible for each one of your family members to go through the course and just learn more about what it's like to do succession planning when the kids are coming home in that first 1 or 2 years. Typical succession planning seminars are about who gets what and how to avoid paying taxes. And that's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss how to incorporate the next generation into your farm, and so that everybody's pulling in the same direction, like Andy says, and you can successfully farm for decades to come. So we'll kick this off. Andy, when it comes to agriculture that maybe is a little bit outside of the periphery of our typical thinking when it comes to farming, what causes the most problems nowadays?
The one thing that we haven't really realized is the biggest change in technology in farming isn't GPS tractors or GMO technologies. Those are important changes in agriculture. But the biggest change we've had is modern health sciences. I mean, it's been a huge game changer. We never really thought about it. You think about, like, we just have fewer farmers dropping dead of heart attacks in their 60s than we did back in the 1960s. When Dad was 60 back in the 1960s, he would retire because his hips were shot. Nowadays, when Dad's hitting 60 and has bad hips, he's getting hip replacement. He's farming to his 80s or 90s. And I think that's awesome. Don't get me wrong. If you want to farm to the day you die and about 5 days after, I'm all about making that happen. But the problem we have is a situation, instead of there just being one generation farming nowadays, we have 2-3 generations farming together. And because this equipment is so damn expensive, it doesn't make sense every 25 years to split up the farm between siblings every 25 years. I mean, because you lose your economies of scale, then you can't afford that technology that gives you that competitive edge to be able to farm economically. So you got a situation, most family farms, instead of there being one dictator on the farm, you've got multiple dictators, right? I know we're talking about the neighbors, not your operation, right? We got too many chiefs, not enough Indians. You probably heard that, right?
Of course.
We're talking about the neighbors, obviously, but we haven't really thought about, I mean, we joke about it, but we really haven't thought about how big of an impact it has on the farm profitability. I mean, if you're constantly butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions for every decision, there's a lot of money slipping between the cracks. And because of family politics, on the days that you're getting along with your family, you don't want to upset the apple cart. And half the decisions that should be discussed are not getting discussed adequately. And there's half the potential profitability is slipping between the cracks.
Right.
Butting heads is just causing so many headaches. And and causing so much frustration that's causing issues of mental health. It's causing really dysfunctional transition of responsibility from one generation to the next. It's a gong show. And we've got to figure out how to get everybody from button heads to being able to sit down and make decisions together, get everybody pulling in the same direction. And that's been the interest of mine for the last 13 years. I've been at this full time. I just figured that out today. 13 years. And, it's a passion of mine, but I'm just tired of taking, I've taken firearms out of suicidal farmers' hands more times than I've got fingers. And we created this course to be proactive to prevent, families having to go through. Why wait 15 years of butting heads to have a mediation? Why not from day one get your family relationships, how you guys work together as soon as the kid comes home from college, so that instead of butting heads all the time, the next 15 years is fun. And that's what this course is all about. This is the first time we've talked about this. I'm really excited to launch it with Washington Farm Bureau and hope to work with folks all across North America. So
Absolutely. And I mean, in my mind, it doesn't matter whether those decisions are big or small. I mean, everything that you're doing together as a family is going to affect the farm in one way or another.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, we got to learn how to make decisions together as a team. We got to go from father knows best to being able to listen to each other and respect each other's ideas. And it's a big transition for a lot of families. And a lot of families are still, and the sons and daughters are in their 40s or even their 50s. And dad is still calling all the shots. And it creates such a dysfunctional environment that it's where nobody's happy. And the farm isn't profitable. Right.
So in Washington, we've got just over 300 different commodities that are grown across our state. It's a real diverse environment to be able to grow such commodities. And each commodity is different, but each commodity also knows, every farmer knows that economic downturns happen. All of a sudden you have terrible commodity prices and then they skyrocket, and every farmer is their own best friend. As soon as the price is good, they produce as much as possible. But I know you wanted to mention the 80s farm crisis a little bit, but how does the 80s farm crisis differ from today's economy that we have to focus on?
Well, you think about the 80s farm crisis, most family operations at that time were sole proprietor operations, and one guy was calling all the shots. And the farmer would get bad news from the bank, and he wouldn't talk to anybody for a week and just go plow and be grumpy, right, for a solid week. And then a lot of times, without even telling his wife that he was going to town, he'd drive into town on a rainy day and go see several people, make several decisions, and turn around the farm. And nowadays, you got a situation, and I work with a lot with dairy producers across North America, but I have vineyards. I have every commodity under the sun. I worked in, I think about 23 states and 5 Canadian provinces. We're doing some with the UK, and we're just experimenting, working with farmers in the UK and Holland actually right now. And we got one guy down in Australia. And it doesn't matter what type of commodity you're growing, it's the business process. How do families make decisions together? And the thing is that, back in the 80s farm crisis, one guy was calling the shots. Nowadays, you take a typical dairy operation. There would be 2-3 farmers farming together. I walked onto a farm. I'm not going to say what state or what the farmer's name is. But basically they got the Farm Family of the Year award. And for the state.
Okay.
And then 3 weeks later, they had an auction sale after they got the award. And it was actually on a day that I got invited by that individual to come out to his state. He had seen me speak at a national event, and he had actually arranged the whole event. And it was half full because half the dairy farmers were at this auction sale helping their buddy sell his cows. And it was really sad, but it was a situation where there's a father and 2 sons, and all brilliant guys. But the problem is the commodity prices in that state had dropped by half for 2 years, and they never once talked about how to squeeze out even 5% extra profitability. They all were brilliant guys. They all had great ideas as to how to improve ideas, but they were talking about their ideas in the shop or in the yard, and they weren't talking. They were yelling at each other, right? They were saying we should be doing it this way, right? And insisting on but not listening to each other's ideas. And as a result of that butting of heads, I mean, mine slipped between the cracks for 2 years. And then one day, the father actually went in to see his brother in the hospital, and seeing his brother couldn't afford good medical insurance and was stuck in a gurney. Basically, he was being poorly looked after. He says, I'm not going to, his older brother was 20 years older than him. He says, I'm not going to be stuck in that situation. And so he pulled the plug on the dairy, and it was all because they never sat down once to figure out how to drop their cost of production. And the son, I said, we talked about the situation, and the son, this is not a good news story, but the thing is, this is a very typical situation for a lot of farms, in that he overnight had a few ideas as to how to actually drop their cost of production to be able to break even at that low commodity price. But the father at that time was not willing to do it. So I think the thing is for your operation, you gotta be proactive before you even hit low commodity prices. And you as a family got to get really good at going from button heads, being able to sit down, make decisions together, get everybody pulling the same direction.
Right.
And it can't be the last minute. It's got to be as soon as you can.
Right. No, that makes sense. And to what relation is that? I mean, from my own experience, that's just conversations about saving in the good years for when it's bad, correct?
I think it's about trying to figure out how you can drop. It's not just a matter of saving. It's a matter of like when I farm with my dad, and we can get into my story later. But the thing is,
go into it. That's next. Go ahead and go into it. What's your background, Andy?
Sorry, I don't know if you want one. Anyway, my name's Andy Junkin. I'm a 7th generation farm boy from a little town called Bobcaygeon, Ontario, Canada. And the day I left for college, my mother, she showed me the farm financials, and she says to me, if you don't fix these numbers, I'm going to leave your father. And so I went to college not to get a piece of paper, but to save the family farm. And when I was there, I did a college course one-on-one with a university professor who taught me how to write a business plan to turn around an operation. And the thing is that I spent possibly 1,000 hours. I had my own office in the university library, which there was no undergrad student that actually had his own office in the university library. It was usually PhDs in the last 6 weeks of their dissertation. But the thing is that I was there 12 hours a day, every day, and just punched in like a factory. And mind you, I had to go out for a drink after at the bar after being in the library to midnight. But the thing is that I worked my ass off. I went to class to meet girls, and I worked my ass off in the university library trying to figure out how to save the family farm. And I must have put 1,000 hours into putting together a plan that was just that thick. And I gave it to my dad. Couldn't wait to do that. And he looked at the cover and he threw it straight in the fire. And I couldn't figure out why. And my mother, she would always make excuses for my father's actions, which were crazy. But she said to him, basically things went on for a couple of years and it got out of control. And the graduating year of college, my mother kept on saying, well, you don't have enough information. She started making excuses for my father. So by the time I graduated from college, like those Tupperware containers, like laundry baskets,
Oh yeah.
I didn't have one full of photocopied research to back up my assumptions. I had 5. It was stacked to the ceiling like an episode of Hoarders. And, it was crazy that none of this information was being considered or even read. And so we had a big fight at Christmas, and my Uncle Claude, he was the ultimate good old boy. He stepped in. He says, well, why don't you give the field behind the house to the boy? He can try out his idea on a couple acres there. If they work, great. We'll try them on the rest of the farm next year. If they don't, you're only out a couple acres. So that's what we went and did. And by August, Claude had terminal cancer at that stage. And so we had a birthday party for him because we knew it was his last. And Claude walked the field behind the house, and he had very direct questions, and he was really impressed with what he seen. And he walks in the house and he slaps his little brother, who's my dad, on the back. And he says, you know, your boy is going to make more money off a couple of acres than you're going to make off the entire farm this year. And Claude just laughed. He just thought it was a big joke. And my dad did not think it was a joke. And you wouldn't believe this, but a couple of days later, my dad, he plowed down my crops. Now, what kind of man plows down his son's crops? I mean, nobody in the county could understand why. And I couldn't figure this out. But, you know, basically things went from bad to worse as far as succession planning and turning around the farm. And my mom, I guess, behind my back, she was constantly supporting my dad in front of me. And it really kind of messed with my head. Like, what was I doing wrong? And so I was spending all this time researching more and more and more. But behind my back, she said to my dad, she says, do not buy any more farming equipment until you have sat down with your son and written a business plan and done a cash flow statement. And just to spite her, one day, my dad went off to an auction sale and he bought himself a manure spreader, and he came home with that manure spreader. And I guess you could say the fit hit the shank. And my parents actually got divorced as a result of that day. And it's kind of a shitty story to tell, but what I've been doing ever since is turning shitty situations around. I started off by helping my friends in Western Ontario. And the last 13 years, this is all I've been doing for a living, is saving family farms. And I think that, you know, what I'm interested in is not succession planning from the standpoint of who gets what, how to avoid paying taxes. I mean, that stuff's easy. But how do you, in the first couple of years, get everybody from button heads to being able to sit down and make decisions and get everybody pulling the same direction? So that's why I'm really excited to be able to work with Washington State Farm Bureau and the young farmers and ranchers in really piloting a program that I think is going to change agriculture for the good in the long term. You know, I'm tired of taking guns off of farms and dealing with all these dysfunctional situations I see every day. Let's get working with families as they come home to the farm, so that farming with families fun for the next 20 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for doing what you do. I mean, that's an incredible backstory, but unfortunately, it kind of is the perfect setup to make sure you're helping farmers that don't, and making sure they don't end up in the same situation that you go through. So thank you for doing that. And now you're just talking, you were getting home from college and you had all these ideas. And I know I've had ideas, but how, as a young farmer coming home to farm, coming back to your parents, how do you get them to buy into the ideas that you may have?
Well, it took me a long time to figure this out. I mean, I became obsessed with trying to understand, why would my dad plow down my crops? Why was he so abrasive to any suggestions for change when he's about to lose the farm and about to lose the family? And I became obsessed with this. I was reading 100 pages a day, trying to figure this out for about a decade. And this has been my obsession. And the thing is that I figured it out, is when young lads come home from agriculture college, they got 1,001 ideas as to how to improve the operation. Now, with my friends, a lot of my friends, their parents were very supportive of the first couple ideas that the son and daughter had. Like a lot of my buddies, I spent 1,000 hours putting together this 1-inch thick business plan. My buddies, I mean, he did his the night before his due in class, and his dad went and spent $1 million doing a barn expansion. I mean, actually, I had 3-4 friends like that where they got a combine paid for, or they bought a farm next door. I mean, their dads are extremely supportive, because here the parents have spent their entire lives to build up the operation to give to the kids on a silver platter. They can't wait to farm. But at some point in time, when the sons and daughters look at the operation and they've got ideas to improve the operation, at some point in time, these ideas to improve the operation come across as criticism of past management decisions. And, you know, sure, mom and dad have made mistakes, but the operation is there for a good reason. But we lose that perspective. And at some point, it's perceived as the son or daughter looking a gift horse in the mouth and being ungrateful. And soon we go from rational decision-making to emotional decision making and it going irrational. And soon, if the son or daughter have an idea to improve the operation, the parents might see some fault in those ideas. And sometimes that's for good reasons. Sometimes it's just because of whose mouth it came out of. And it gets further and further down the wormhole, I guess you'd say. And soon, if the son says black, the dad will say white, just to be in spite. And it flips around too equally, is that if dad has an idea, well, because he shot my idea down, I'm not going to support him and his idea. And it creates such a cynical, negative environment on a family farm. And, you know, and soon, and instead of, it's more important to be right than for things to be right. And it creates a very wrong situation. And all we've got to do is change how we deal with change itself. And I think that the mistake I made with my dad was we were a beef operation, okay? 7th generation beef operation. And the thing is, my dad, our cost of production was $1.20. So really that 5% of the time that the markets were really high, we were breaking even. Back in the 70s, we were a very profitable operation, but by the 90s, we weren't. And the thing is that our cost of production was between 83 cents to, we were getting paid 83 cents to 95 cents on the markets at that time. And we were just losing cash, right? And equipment was depreciating so bad that we couldn't replace it. And the thing is, I came home with this 5 Tupperware containers full of ideas, telling my dad how to farm. And the problem was I was telling my dad what to do. And the thing was, the word what was the wrong word. I should have focused on, first of all, on the word why. The word why instead of what. Because the thing is that my dad, he just thought the markets would get any better any time. You know, every time my parents had an argument, there was a door that got slammed, and just about 5 seconds before that door got slammed, it was like, the market's going to rise anytime. That's the Eastern Ontario accent, if you remember. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The thing is that was what he said every time, every argument. And he really did believe that. I mean, he heard these politicians. He listened to politicians that told him what he wanted to hear. And he listened to anybody would tell him what he wanted to hear, that the markets were going to rise anytime. And, you know, what I needed to do, first of all, was convince my dad, look, Dad, we're getting paid 83 cents in the market. We should set a goal of getting our cost of production down to 80 cents a pound. And the worst case, we should have our average case scenario be geared for the worst case scenario, so that even when the markets hit a low, we can survive. And it might be that we only get our cost of production from $1.20 down to 90 cents, but still, that's going to get us along the way. But I failed to do this, and as a result, we failed. And I think what's really important for a son and daughter coming home to the farm, one of the first things you got to do is you got to get your parents and everybody on the operation around a common goal as to what the future of the farm looks like. And then from that, a lot of other changes can happen. And for my operation, as long as my dad thought the prices were going to stay at go up to $1.20, or there's going to be some subsidies, he didn't see the need to change. And so I think that's one of the first things you should do is get your family to get grounded in reality and say, okay, what's the worst case scenario we could be seeing here? Like for a lot of dairy producers, they're holding on, hoping that the markets go up anytime. And right. I've done a lot of farm debt turnarounds, basically by just simply saying, okay, $14 milk is the lowest. Let's gear our operations so that we can break even at $14. And even if it's $17 today, maybe in the next 5 years, it's going to be $14. And if it stays at 17, we're producing it for 14, then we're just making more money. And you can turn around an operation and how families work together by changing the goals, shifting the goalposts. And I think that's really important.
Right. No,
and I think that's an example of something we talk about in this course, and really shifting the mindset of how the family works together.
Good to know. I know, you just touched on milk prices. I know right now we're sitting at about $14.50 for conventional milk in Washington. I was looking at futures just last night, and it's not looking like it's going to touch $17 for at least a year.
Yeah. I think what we got to do is change how we problem solve in agriculture, right? We when Thomas Henry Ford, he created the Model T Ford, right? And that culture that Ford created is in all of our businesses. And basically what Ford did was he said, I'm going to pay people 5 times the going wage, and I'm going to hire the best and then fire the rest. And so basically he says, and by the 1930s, Ford actually had a lineup of people out the door down the street wanting to work for him. But they had a problem that the Model T Ford was breaking down before he even got to the parking lot. And they hired this guy from, he was an Iowa farm boy named Edward Deming. He had a PhD in statistics, and they hired him to figure out who to fire, because there was some reason that these Model T Fords were breaking down the parking lot. They wanted to know who to fire. And the thing is that Deming looked the situation, and what he seen was about 1,000 people touching a car, and just statistical probability, you're going to make at least one mistake in the course of a week, if not several. And the problem was that everybody was afraid to admit that they made a mistake because they would be fired. So they had a culture where they swept their mistakes underneath the carpet, and they got really good at shifting blame onto somebody else. And so Ford had Deming into their boardroom, and they said, well, who should we fire? And they said, well, Deming says, there's nobody to fire. I mean, the problem is that as a statistician, I can tell you that the probability of perfection is 0. You're always going to have mistakes. The problem you guys have is that you guys expect everything to be perfect, and you don't have a method there to actually problem solve. And it just went against the whole mindset of Ford at that time. They couldn't admit that there was anything wrong with what they did. Everything they did was perfect. And they said, okay, who should we fire? And they said, well, if anything, you guys should be firing the executive, because you guys are setting the wrong tone of leadership in your organization. So they fired his ass, and Deming couldn't get a job for a long time. And then he finally went over to a little bombed out country called Japan. And he went to this little bombed out factory called Toyota. And even though the Japanese didn't speak the same language, they got it. And basically he went into Toyota and he created the Toyota way. And basically they started, instead of like the Japanese at that time, you got to understand, they just came out of that war, and they had that culture that if you made a mistake, you had to fall on your sword. So the Japanese were even more motivated than the North Americans to shift blame onto somebody else, right? But he totally changed that country around in that he started paying bonuses for anybody that could identify a mistake. And then he got a bonus to anybody that could actually sit around the table and brainstorm together ways to solve that problem. And so instead of, nothing against the president or Donald Trump, but we all seen Donald Trump's the boardroom of The Apprentice, where everybody's backstabbing each other, wanting to find somebody to blame. That's what's wrong with our business and agriculture, right? If you look at a family farm where there's a problem, that hour when you're sitting down to solve a problem, it's not about solving a problem, it's about figuring out who to blame. And, you know, if you're running an organization in New York City like Donald Trump is, it's easy to fire people, but you just can't fire grandpa because he didn't put on the milkers rate. But that's what's happening. I mean, you look at a situation, how many times you've seen mom and dad get pushed off the farm because the kids don't think that they're doing things right. And they make a big story to the community about how it's for the best, but nobody's happy. How many times you've seen a situation where there's one sibling out of say 3 or 4 that want to farm, but they show up late to work, or they do a few things that are dysfunctional. And then the family, after a couple of years, say, okay, have an intervention. They say, well, we think you'd be a really good feed salesman, right? And that's how feed salesmen are created.
Yep.
Right? And the thing is, we have this culture where every few years somebody's getting voted off the island, right? That's the business culture we have. And what we got to do is we got to shift the whole mindset instead of shifting blame onto somebody else. And we got to get really good at problem solving. And that is one of the key things that we got when the first couple of years that you're coming home to farm, you got to really shift your whole philosophy about how you do things. And if you can do that as a family, it's amazing how much more profitability you'll be. I mean, you can drop your cost. I've dropped farms where we've dropped their cost of production by $2 a hundredweight for milk in the course of 2 years. Easy. I've taken farms where we had $17 million. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but just a year and a half, like a year ago, February, we had a farm, they had $17 million, bank pulled financing. And there's several brothers. And I can tell you today, we instead of actually worrying about the problems that they had a lot. We worked on the problem solving methodology itself. And they actually had 3 nephews because of COVID, quit school, and the kids are coming home now. The kids didn't have a farm to come home to a year and a half ago, right? We've been able to turn around. They've been able to divest some land, but reinvest it. They're actually in a new business venture where they just put $1 million into a program that, it's got huge potential. And, I've seen that kind of thing happen so many times in and out, but you got to change how you deal with change.
Right.
And I think that's what you got to do as a young farmer. Okay.
Certainly. I want to take a minute real quick. If anybody's got any questions, I've got Facebook Live on my screen over here, but if you're in the Zoom meeting, if you're on Facebook Live, you got questions, go ahead and use the Q&A function, or I believe you can just comment on the video that's on Facebook Live. But if you got questions that you want answered before the end of this, let us know. I'll be checking them out as we keep going here. But
yeah.
So
I think we should also say, Caleb, is that this is the first time we ever done this, right? We don't know if this is just you two guys talking and nobody else is listening, or we don't know. But the thing is, we'd love to know from folks if this is something that you found interesting. Send an email to Caleb, because we've talked about the idea of the first Thursday of every month, and I think the next one would be April 1st, right? If
possibly, yeah, maybe.
We never know, right? But we thought about there's about 15 lectures I have in my course, and tonight we're talking about how do you get everybody from butting heads and pulling the farm different directions to being able to sit down and make decisions together and pull in the same direction. I think I've said that too many times now, but anyways, the thing is, that's a theme for tonight, but there's 15 different themes, and I think that it might be interesting to do over the next 15 months. But we want to know from you folks if that's something of interest. And more importantly, we want to get real questions from you folks, so we can spice it up and it's just not two guys talking to themselves.
Right. And that'll really help us be able to narrow the conversation a little bit too.
That would be great. Yeah.
And I'll let people know now. I've gotten a sneak peek of the course itself, just working with Andy. He's structured it so that the younger generation takes one course, the older generation takes the same course, but it's presented in a different way that's tailored to each generation. And seeing both sides, I mean, I'm really excited about it, pretty hopeful about it, and really hoping that we do have some farms jump on this opportunity. So, yeah. Okay, we've been talking about this.
Maybe we should talk about the courses. I mean, we were going to talk about it then, but maybe that we can just talk about it right quick here, and then we can answer any questions that folks might have.
Go for it.
But somebody, if somebody could ask us a question, we'd love that. But the thing is that this course is basically 10 hours. And so it's structured so that it's you listen to about an hour a day over the course of a week. So I structured it so that during spring planting, you can start the course, and by the end of the week, after you've driven tractor for a solid week, we encourage, there's about 3 segments per day. And so basically you listen to little segments, 20 minutes, 10 to 30 minutes, depending on the lecture. And then I want you to actually think about, we're going to ask you one simple question, but instead of you just answering it like it's a grade 5 math test, spending a couple hours thinking about why you farm, you know, while you're staying awake at night, try not to hit electricity poles.
Yeah.
You know, think about your future. And the whole idea is that from that, we put together one pager, and that kind of really maps out your future. And so that's the course. And then there's basically a three-hour exam at the end of the course where you start that exam and you will have a different perspective about your future life at the end of that course, at the end of that 3-hour exam. And then I'll sit down with you, and you'll probably be having a midlife crisis by that moment. And I'll sit down with you for a couple hours, and we'll just talk about what you want to do for your future. And if it means that because we're using Zoom, we can structure it so we can structure a few little appointments, or we can sit down for a couple hours, whatever works for you. And then after I've talked to you and your different family members that have participated in the course, we'll sit down with the whole family and we'll get everybody on the same page. And that's how the course is structured. And it's actually being adapted by a lot of colleges as elective curriculum for this year, but we're looking at it being core curriculum next year. So it's pretty exciting that way. But as Washington Farm Bureau is the first farm bureau to really promote it to their members, and I really appreciate Caleb and how he went to bat for this program and is making things happen for Washington farmers. I really appreciate that.
Not a problem. I'm glad I could help out. Pretty exciting that you've gotten it in the college curriculum too, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually being used today. I can't say what. It's a state just east of me, okay. But they're actually teaching it for their financial planning course as well, which is pretty cool. So, I mean, that's really, I mean, with Washington Farm Bureau, we got an 80% discount. I don't care about making money off this. I'm just tired of taking guns off farms, dealing with crazy situations which should never have happened to begin with. Caleb and I are trying to change agriculture, and I really appreciate you, the Washington Farm Bureau, being on board with that. I think you guys understand that if you don't have young farmers coming into the industry, you don't have members, and really the country has no future.
Right. Absolutely. Let's see. I know we've got a few comments coming in on Facebook saying that this is good information and absolutely relatable stories. And good. So that's good to hear from some of the audience's perspective. So we've been talking about having those conversations, asking those why questions. Do you have a process, or do you have examples of how you can both change farm profit and how families can be better at listening to each other?
Well, I think that what I've done is over the last 13 years is really flipped around mediation. Okay. So when I walked, usually after a family's been bickering for about 5 years, they get in a mediator out to the farm. And I used, like today, I just started working with yesterday I started working with a family. They've already had 5 mediators out to the farm, and they've most of the farms, because I'm the guy from Canada. By the way, I'm originally from Bobcaygeon, Ontario, Canada, and I'm married a Midwestern girl, farmersonly.com. That's all I got to say. And we live in Iowa now, just the last couple of years. So farmersonly.com, can't recommend it enough. Anyways, but the point of it is that the point of it is that when we started doing mediation, I went and did it like everybody else. And what I started to notice was I'd show up to a farm and everybody be around the kitchen table and everybody have their arms crossed. And quite often I have one guy, for instance, he actually said this. He was a patriarch. He was in his 60s. And he says, "Come fix my son-in-law." And I've actually had something similar said to that so many times. They always feel that there's somebody else that has to be changed. And even the sweetest little old lady that makes the best pies, if you get her in that meeting room, it's like Donald Trump's boardroom, right? Where, sweetest little old lady made the best pie an hour ago. Don't cross her, or else she's got all the dirt on to spill on every family member.
Yep.
Right. And that's the attitude. And, for the first couple of years I started doing this, I really struggled because I was trying to get everybody would say, well, you need to change. Well, then I try to get that person to actually make the change, and he'd be saying, well, I'll change after he changes this. Right. And that gets you nowhere really quick. That gets you absolutely nowhere. And what I found is that you got to get everybody in the family willing to make changes themselves, not expect another guy to change. And that is a fundamental shift in mindset, right? We have this pointing the fingers, but there's really 3-4 fingers pointing back at us. And how do you get the family members to change? I mean, we have this attitude that, I don't know about you, Caleb, but I think there's no better place for a kid to grow up than the family farm. And I'm a huge believer in 4-H, huge believer. But what is 4-H about? It's not about leading calves backward on a dog leash, right? It's about self-improvement and becoming a better person every day. Well, at some point in time, whether you're 25 or 29 or 32, you get into this belief that there's nothing I need to change. Everybody else has to change. Right. And as a result, you got everybody pointing blame on each other, and it just creates a dysfunctional environment. So the first thing you got to do is get everybody to make a few simple changes. And it might be getting family members to quit smoking or lose 30 pounds. But I want to see, when I start working with a family, I want to see everybody willing to make a sacrifice and make a change and actually admit to themselves that there's something that they can go. Because the thing is, the families I work with that are the most hardest cases, these are usually the best families, like really brilliant people, really hardworking, very successful. You'd be surprised that this family had any problems because from the road, they just look like the perfect operation. And, with the Christmas cards that are photogenic, right? But the thing is, everybody's got 5% about themselves that has to go from good to great. And I think that's the critical thing is you've got to be able to have a process of continuous improvement and get everybody to look at farming as a challenge to become a better man every day or a better woman every day. And if you can get that attitude within the whole family as far as continuous improvement, and if you can start that from day one, as soon as the kid comes home to the farm, instead of the kid getting defensive about making mistakes and want to shift blame, you can fundamentally change an operation.
No, absolutely. That's good insight. I know I've got when I went to university and even in high school, there were some leadership courses that I participated in, and it was mostly basically how you are changing yourself. You have to be able to help yourself before you can help others.
Yeah.
And so, you have to know who you are before you can start influencing the people around you. And so that completely makes sense.
But we just miss that in agriculture. We just miss that. And so the thing is, when I want to walk onto a farm and help a family, the first thing I do is, usually somebody's like pointing blame at, like I had a situation one time where the dad went on about how his son had a temper, right? And he spent 45 minutes giving like examples, right? 45 minutes. And the truth was, I went to see the daughter and the mom in separate rooms. They said the same thing, that dad has a temper. And usually within every family, we have a few family traits which we could all improve on. And if you can start there, like anger management is quite often, or being passive aggressive. If you can get a family to really over 90 days to take a weakness like anger management and take a few courses or do a few things to make turn that around, and everybody works on it together, and everybody holds each other accountable without being onerous. I mean, it's amazing if you can every 90 days make one improvement like that over, even 2 years, that's 8 improvements, right? And it'd be amazing how different your operation is. And that's a key part of my philosophy, is that idea of continuous improvement. as opposed to shifting blame on each other. It just doesn't work.
Right, right. I know it doesn't look like we've had any questions come in over the Zoom, and there hasn't been any further comments on the videos on Facebook. I know you've referenced this course as a pre-marriage course, or that's how you've advertised it before. Can you explain that a little bit?
It's a long story, but in the province of Ontario, I'm a licensed Mary and Barry. Okay. You know what? We got 5 minutes. At one time there's a window of opportunity when they switched from gay marriages to they introduced an opportunity. So I actually went online, became a reverend for a buddy's wedding, right? And so he had a dairy. I mean, basically his wife said, if I can get a license, we can marry him. So anyways, I stepped out of the barn and they had about 300 guests on the front lawn in front of a 500 cow dairy. And I stepped out of the barn with a shotgun and I fired off a shotgun. And I said, does everybody have a seat now? And usually if you try to get 300 guests on a lawn after they've had a few hours of drinking, that's like herding cats. Well, everybody sat down really quick. And I got up to the front of the room, the front of the everybody was just sitting on straw bales. And I said, and I said something about love and marriage, which I really didn't know anything about at that time. And I says, does anybody have any objections to this here wedding? I reloaded the shotgun. Nobody had anything to say. And so 13 minutes later, they were officially married in the province of Ontario. I thought that was a one-time gig. And it turned out that I married 42 couples after that.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the preacher in the small town, he was like, they looked down their noses at it. But after me work, I helped so many people in that congregation of his. He says, you've actually married more people and helped more families than I have in my whole congregation, right? But the point of it is that I actually did marriage counseling, not marriage counseling, but the pre-marriage class, right? So that's the backstory. But anyways,
got it. Okay.
The thing is that in pre-marriage class, like once 50 years ago, everybody got married. They thought it was going to be sunshine and unicorns. There was no reality as to what to expect, or they didn't anticipate things that are not commonly talked about openly in the community. And that's the same thing for farming. Like we see a lot of families fall apart, but we hear their excuses for it. They don't really know the real story. And there's a lot of landmines that a lot of families are not aware of. And every day I see grown men that could take on you, me, and 5 other people, break down crying, right? Very tough farmers break down crying because of the soft issues have become hard problems. And simply put, they went to agriculture college, they read every book on farming, they know their stuff, but there is a whole level of management and a whole level of problems in farming that they were never told about. And unfortunately, they had to hit every one of those landmines. And so the whole purpose of this course is for families to identify what are the possible landmines that they're going to be encountering. And so, and more importantly, how do we set up the systems in place so that our family weaknesses become our biggest strengths? And so we don't go into this thinking it's going to be sunshine and unicorns and then just surprised when we have problems. We get really good at problem solving, and that's our competitive advantage, right? Not our economies of scale, but that the problem solving is our competitive advantage. And I think that's what this course is about. Another part of this course as well is really challenging the successor. Is this really what you want? Are you coming home to farm because your parents want you to farm and they've had this plan since you were 4? Or is this because you really want this? And what is it going to take for you to be able to make this opportunity happen? So that's the background of that too. Right. But I think it's so important. So that makes sense.
That's good. That's good. I know problem solving, and especially when it starts to become proactive, and then you can avoid those landmines. That's definitely helpful.
Yeah. I mean, everybody thinks that, well, farming with economies of scale is important, right? I mean, you got to have a certain level. You can't be like my grandpa who had a 30 cow beef operation that hit like a hillbilly. right? You got to have a certain level of economies of scale. But you give me a $5 million farm, or you give me a $40 million farm, and that $5 million farm, you know, they're in the $40 million farm, they have the same management structure today. There's several family members, several generations, several cousins. Everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm different directions. That $40 million farm refuses to change. They're just dysfunctional. So for the next 10 years, they're butting heads, right? Every decision, and half the decisions that they should be discussing, they don't even discuss because they don't want to rock the boat the days that they're getting along. Money slipping between the cracks because of it. You get that $5 million farm, and they're able to go from button heads, be able to sit down and make decisions together, and everybody pulling the same direction. I got two questions for you. The first question is, if you have low commodity prices for 5 years over the next 10, who's going to be able to squeak by? Because that farm with a $40 million, they might have a 3% competitive advantage as far as economies of scale. But if you have a farm that's able to drop your cost of production by 10% every couple of years,
Right.
it's huge. And the other question is whose farm do you actually want to be on? The farm where everybody's bickering every day, or everybody gets along? I mean, farming should be fun, right? And that's why we're doing it.
Absolutely. Most of it is fun, especially when you can proactively avoid those landmines.
That's exactly.
That's a good reference. It doesn't matter how big you are. It matters how you can adapt, how you can survive.
Yeah.
So, we don't have any questions coming in. We're pushing up on the hour mark, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Just a reminder to everybody listening, this course is available on the Washington Farm Bureau website. Just find the Young Farmers and Ranchers page, and you'll be able to click through to the Coming Home to Farm online course provided by Andy, Cage, and Junkin with Agriculture Strategy. It's about a 10-hour course. Each family member participates. And this live event is something that we want to keep doing. We want to make sure that we're providing helpful information to all of our members, to all of our farmers in Washington. So we really encourage you to share out this information, share out the course, share out this video. It'll be posted to Facebook shortly after we finish this meeting. But just share a few things, what you thought of it, and hopefully we can get some more people joining us later on, have some really important discussion interactions as we keep this project going into the future. So it's looking like, Andy mentioned it earlier, probably Thursday, April 1st. It's not a joke. We'll probably have the next live event, and we hope you can join us for that. But what's one last thing you want to leave us with tonight, Andy?
I just think that we've been thinking about farm suicides a lot these days, and they've been skyrocketing. But I think that there's a lot of reasons for people, especially farmers, to consider suicide. But I think one aspect we haven't really thought about, or a different way to look at the situation that kind of looks at what we've been talking about tonight, is the fact that when a farmer's sitting on the edge of the barn beam about to jump, the decision to actually jump, that is a definite decision. And he's saying to the world, there is no other way to solve my problems. And there's always different options in there. And that really, what we talk about is we talk about mental health, we talk about farm economics, and we talk about what goes on in a man's mind for 10 seconds before he jumps. But we never think about what would the 10 years before that moment and the situation on farm, and how for 10 years, everybody's been butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And everybody's been trying to get their way, right? And it's done nothing but create headaches. It's done nothing but cause family members that were very tight at one time to be estranged from one another. So that a man is sitting so lonely on a barn beam by himself that he's convinced that jumping is a good decision. And the problem we have is in decision-making itself, in the fact that, we only see one way, and it's my way or the highway. And we got an environment when you're farming with multiple siblings and multiple generations, you got a situation where it's more important to be right than for things to be right. And it's creating a very wrong situation that's killing us on so many different levels. And the one simple solution to this problem isn't by more government subsidies for farmers. The one simple solution is that instead of looking at things one way, we got to look at things at least 5 different ways. For every decision that you make with your partners, you've got to stop coming to your partners in the yard and saying, this is what we should be doing, and it's going to be my way or the highway. We've got to say, I've identified this one problem, and here's 2 or 3 different solutions that we could do. We could, because there's many ways to skin a cat. And we got to have that attitude, is there many ways to skin the cat? And you don't stop talking about the problem until with your partners. You might come to the partner with 2 or 3 different options, but it's really important that you stop and you listen to their ideas and you brainstorm 5, at least 5. And it might take you an extra 5 minutes, or even 10 minutes to sit down and discuss those different ideas. But when you think about this, anything you can do to improve the quality of decision-making on your farm, it's going to skyrocket profitability. And all that butting heads, I mean, all those headaches, that's going to go by the wayside and farming becomes fun again. And I think it's just simply a matter of having on the answer down the edge of your fingertip to go from 1 to 5 by listening to each other. It's more important for things to be right than for you to be right.
Yeah. Nothing's ever that bad. There's always a solution, but there's nothing ever that bad that needs to push a farmer or anybody for that fact to jump. So, well, Andy, I want to thank you for staying up late tonight. I know you're out in the Midwest, but our members certainly appreciate it. And we appreciate you providing this service, this online course for us. And I'm sure we'll connect soon. So thank you.
Anybody wants to give me a call, just give me a call. You go to agriculturestrategy.com. My numbers are there. So just give me a call anytime. Preferably not 2 o'clock in the morning, but if you need to, that's fine too. I'm there for you. But I mean, if you like this webinar, this is the first time we've done it. So please send Caleb or I email to tell us what you thought about it, and maybe even just share it on Facebook, because the thing is, the more farmers we can get exposed to this new way of thinking, the more farmers they're going to be happy with their family Christmas 10 years down the road.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Take care.
Yeah, you too, Andy. Thank you very much. All right. And that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you again.